we've been spending the last few weeks working on visual pipelines. And we're really excited to release it to the market. And we wanted to just get in front of you guys, talk a bit about why we built this. And at the end, we'll show off the product itself. We'll give you a quick demo. So with that, Zach, Ozan, do you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, sounds good. So my name is Zach Quiring. I've been at Edge Delta for about 4 years now, director of products. I also pretty heavily involved in the solutions architecture organization, so working with our users and customers, but I've been really focused on the Visual Pipeline Builder project and super excited to be here and talk about it today.
And my name is Ozan Unlu. I'm founder and CEO here. We've been at this for about 5 years, and I'm pretty excited for this release.
Awesome. Yeah, we're all super excited about it. And just to give the audience a quick definition, because you might just be joining us and not know what Visual Pipelines is. But what this is it's a single point-and-click interface to collect, process, and route your observability data. There's really two main benefits to that. One is simplicity. The other one is understanding and transparency into both your pipelines and your data. With that, Ozan, you talk a lot about kind of a path to understanding and the importance of understanding your data before you really do anything with it. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and why that's so important?
Yeah. I mean, I think first of all, big shout out to our engineering team. We're all really proud about what we've built. And along with that, also our customers and design partners. We wanted to make sure that we hit the various different corner cases and made sure that we weren't overthinking something or underthinking something. And so really appreciate both, obviously, our engineers as well as our customers and design partners. Going back to the understanding point that you mentioned before, in my mind, you cannot get to a productive state where you're starting to improve your data pipelines and your observability pipelines without first going through the exercise of understanding. And I think we've all been there as engineers where, you jump into a brand new project or you join a new company or, frankly, data sets are added or data sets are removed. And you always have to, at the very beginning, come to a state of understanding so that you can then go to start, testing, iterating, and improving your data pipelines. I think one of the things I'm most excited about is that real, transparency and understanding and simplicity that gives this intuitive and effortless feel to being able to work with your observability stack and kind of improve your observability stack. So, that's what I'm really excited about.
Zach, you spend a lot of time with customers day in and day out. We know the market's been asking for this set of features and this set of benefits that we're really unlocking here. Yeah. Do you want to talk a bit about why that's been such a need for the customers?
Yeah, I'd say there's a few key themes that we focus on. We're meeting with customers, we're hearing feedback, Edge Delta from a platform perspective for a while. One area, big focus for this project is basically the concept of like complexity. How can we kind of address complexity in this space, take it head on, and try to lead to more of like a simple or simplicity path, where that complexity comes from, not just from an Edge Delta like configuration perspective, but a lot of the tools and platforms in this space is, we're working with data sets, we're doing complicated things. There might be configuration files or YAML or JSON. There's a lot of stuff that we want to do. So that was a big kind of theme for this project is how do we make these set of tasks that are seemingly, typically somewhat complicated, make them more simple. The other area that I'd say, kind of two other big areas, one of them is, Ozan kind of touched on this before, but the ability to like quickly iterate and test and, make changes to these pipelines. So that's been a huge focus for us. We'll see a bit of that in the demo and probably go into that a little bit deeper as we go on. I think the third piece, which ties into some of the stuff that Ozan was saying, is around the kind of this like transparency theme of basically being able to, anyone come in and understand this is exactly what my pipeline's doing. These are all the data sets that we're working with. Here's all the manipulations happening along the way. Here's exactly where everything's going. So quickly come in, digest what's happening. If the goal or intention is to go in and like make a change, make it super easy to know exactly where that needs to happen. And I think the fourth area, which we'll probably go into a little deeper, is this concept of developer self-service, which we hear a lot in the space, but we'll probably chat about that more. But I think those are four areas that we said, we want to take these head on and figure out how we can build the best product based on the feedback our customers have been giving and kind of the market that we're in. We're super excited about where everything landed, and yeah.
And I think that the interesting thing about it too is I feel like before this release, our industry was actually quite subpar at giving this visibility into DevOps, SRE, and developers to be able to understand, their pipelines and be able to work with them. So I think, I've been in this space for 15 years, and we look at, the pace of innovation and how it's quickly improving. I mean, you look back at all the various different tool sets, whether it was, Chef, Puppet, SaltStack, Ansible, more recently we have Terraform, or, having your configuration living in GitHub. And realistically, when you think about it, has to be, we touch on these concepts of, being able to understand, being able to test, being able to iterate, because effectively it's not a destination. It is an always constant iterative process along the journey. And that iterative process needs to be, motivating to be able to enable open observability. And that's a big thing, right? In theory, open observability should have been enabled by observability pipelines all along. But we know the reality is that typically there's, one person or one team that ends up being the bottleneck, that ends up being the, power user or expert, and it ends up actually detracting from what you're trying to accomplish with your observability stack. And so, that's what I think I'm really excited about is, this really easy and intuitive way now allows the masses to be able to get value out of observability pipelines and allow you to very quickly accomplish things where, traditionally it took a lot more time and effort. So,
no, I think that's a really great point. And just kind of like summarizing and putting a bow on that, there's like really 4 key areas where we see the market and where we wanted to address, taking what was complicated and making it simple, making it really easy for people to test and iterate, providing transparency, and all of that as an enabler. Our number 4 thing to developer self-service and making it really easy to get rid of these bottlenecks that you're talking about, Ozan. So I think that's a really great and compelling story there. One thing you touched a little bit on was open observability. And I know that as a company, we think about open observability and we think about modular observability and how these are like interrelated concepts that are both really important to our customers. Do you want to double click on that a little bit and talk about why that's been such a focus for us at EdgeDelta?
Yeah, I think, look, we've been in the observability pipelines space for years, and we've been a leader in this space for years. And, we're now starting to see this massive demand for modular observability. And when we think about it, really, we pride ourselves in the fact that EdgeDelta gives you a lot deeper insights for a lot less effort. And that is a big theme. And with modular observability, you want a simple process for being able to collect your data, pre-process it, figure out where it eventually ends up, resulting as a downstream destination. And for modular observability, you need to ensure that that each one of those different components is healthy, functioning. You can see the various different data flows. And this is actually like a little bit more of a high level view than the nitty gritty of like, what is a specific regular expression I'm using to filter out certain data? Or what is the sampling rate I'm using on this data stream? And so I think, that ability to have not only modular observability to get more out of your data for a much lower price point, but also to be able to enable you to, see and make sure that that whole pipeline is healthy from start to finish.
Totally. No, and so one concept that we always talk about, visibility, transparency, but as you're explaining here, it's not just one type of transparency. There's different levels, different platitudes to this. Zach, do you want to talk a little bit about, as you were driving this product, the different types of transparency you wanted to enable for our customers?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's kind of 2 areas, maybe like from a transparency perspective, that we're really focused on. One of them is transparency into understanding exactly what's happening from a pipeline perspective. So that's really, hey, what is my configuration doing? What is every step of what's happening with the data every step along the way? Where is it being collected from? Where is it being sent? And people being able to quickly come in, digest, understand what's happening, make updates, and not have to, sift through configuration files that are in different places, try to build like a mental model of what's happening. That's what we see a lot of time. We hear from a lot of our customers is, historically trying to build this mental model of exactly what's happening with the data. It might live in, some pieces in a configuration file here, some pieces in a UI somewhere else. So there might be like tribal knowledge to understand everything that's happening along the way. So we're really trying to, break that down, make it super clear, super obvious, what makes up all the components of the pipeline. I think that's one aspect of transparency that's super important. And then the other area would be more around, less about, like Ozan said, the nitty gritty of every little bit or processing that's happening with the data along the way, and more bigger picture, like what is all the data that we're collecting? Where are we collecting it from? Who's it being used by? Getting granular metrics into like data volumes for every stream, for every metadata, metadata tag, or which team it belongs to. So that's something we hear a lot of is, like today, it might be difficult for companies to understand exactly what's going on with these different data streams, who they belong to, how much value they provide. And I think that's a big piece that we have a lot of focus on, is making it super clear, what data sets are what, who they belong to, how valuable they are, and then using the capabilities of the pipeline. If there's use cases like, hey, this particular data set, it's very high volume. It's not necessarily the most like high value data set. What capabilities of the pipeline should we use to help optimize it, make it more efficient, make it more useful and valuable? And that's, a big area. It kind of unlocks concepts of, we talk to customers about like data budgets or, chargeback models, and, having visibility into all these streams and ownership.
I think that's the biggest point, right? Like, we cannot emphasize enough. So I'm going to say it again, which is, effectively you have, it's a lot different if it was one person in a one person company, but that's not the reality in the industry, right? So you have a lot of engineers, a lot of people that want to get value out of the observability stack. And so, this isn't a one-time thing where I set it up one time. There is that tribal knowledge, and there is that ability for, people to go in there and change things. So, when we talk about understanding, it is a continual understanding that you have, in real time about what's happening to your data sets, where are they coming from, what's happening to them, and where do they eventually end up as a destination. At the end of the day, you need to be able to get value out of that. And that's, an easy way to do it.
Yeah. And I would say, one thing to add to what you just mentioned, another big theme that I think is relevant here that kind of ties some of the concepts we've been talking about is this concept of developer self-service. So this is something we hear all the time, especially in larger, enterprise organizations where, as Ozan mentioned, it might be, it's not just one person, one data set, one team. It might be, 50 independent developer teams or hundreds of different teams with their own requirements for their data, how it's being collected, what needs to happen to it. So that's been a massive focus for us, is enabling this concept of developer self-service. And what that really means is, typically when we, start conversations with an organization, a lot of times we'll start with what we would call like a central observability, team. And in certain cases, it's a DevOps team. In other organizations, it might be platform engineering. But typically that team is responsible for the downstream tooling, so where the data lands, but also the collection of that data. So like the agents, making sure the right data is being collected, maybe a little bit of processing in the middle, or like basic filtering or other, basic components, but really, is all the right data being collected, and is it being sent where it needs to go? But then the actual streams of data, that are a lot of times produced by the applications, core components of the business, the context about that data belongs more towards these individual teams and the people who are actually consuming that data downstream. And that's where we want to, make it super easy to have this, to be able to basically delegate ownership of the pipeline. So, a common pattern we see is a central team is kind of setting up the fundamental requirements of the pipeline. We have to collect this data. Some of it has to go to this tool. Some of it has to go to some archive storage somewhere else. But then what happens in the middle there is where we can delegate ownership to an individual team, because a lot of times they have more context about their stream. They have more requirements. Hey, I want to add these tags, or I can safely filter this piece out and it won't impact anything downstream. But the kind of the central team or the platform owner, they need to have the confidence that when they give these other teams the ability to modify the pipeline, that it's not going to break their requirements of these data sets we have to collect and these requirements of where it needs to go. So that's, a huge part we're really excited about, is really unlocking that developer self-service and making both the central teams as well as the developer teams confident that they can kind of independently do their own work within the platform. and not necessarily have like a central team be a bottleneck or always have to kind of make changes on behalf of somebody else. So, that's a big focus for us and something we see a lot of.
I don't know if you guys caught that, but when he said archive, he pointed at me, so I don't know how to feel about that.
Oh, man. So I really love that talk track talking about developer self-service. A key part of that workflow and enabling velocity to me is the whole notion of being able to iterate and test without having to guess and check. Hey, I'm going to build something, deploy it. Is it right? I don't know. Let's redeploy it and kind of go again and again. Do you want to talk a little bit about like why that was an area of focus for us as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you kind of touched on it at the beginning there, but basically what we've seen both with some of the ways that our platform worked historically, as well as other platforms our customers might have used in the past, is there's this really common, potentially lengthy or time-consuming iteration and testing process that involves, hey, I've made this modification to a configuration file. I don't know if it's exactly what I want, but in order to test it, I need to go deploy that to a particular system, let it run for a while, send some data somewhere else, go check that tool. Does it look right? Does it not? Oh, if it doesn't look right, I need to go back to my configuration, start this whole process over and over again.
And I think the people that have been in this space a long time, that is something that they know is such a consistent, constant thing that they're always having to experience, right? It's not a one-time cost. It's not a one-time, okay, well, we can do this right the first time, or we can do this right ahead of time. And we don't have these ongoing time or downstream costs. And like one of the big things that we're most passionate about is giving time back to engineers and time back to our customers. And so, that's one area where, when you talk about iteration, and we talk about this a lot, it is an iteration in your observability stack, and then diving down, it's an iteration in your pipelines on how that actually enables the rest of your stack. So I think to kind of take that a step further, what we're really trying to do is enable our customers to have that choice, right? In order to have that choice, you have to have that understanding of what's happening within your data sets. And then, if the data eventually ends up in Edge Delta, or it eventually ends up in a different observability tool, is up to you, right? And, all the various different value that you get out of it can be a lot more effective and efficient at getting that value from a team perspective, by the fact that you can visually see these things and you can enable the rest of the team instead of just one point person and one specific bottleneck to be that thing that kind of slows you down.
You've actually kind of begun, sorry to interrupt you, Zach, you've begun answering my question there, so I just want to double click on the last thing you just said there. Our last couple of major releases at Edge Delta have been building more complete observability feature sets and enabling those use cases as well. So not just routing data to another platform, but using Edge Delta to analyze your observability data. Where does this fit into all that in terms of this new pipelines release?
Yeah, I mean, I think really kind of it comes down to, I would say, overall risk, right? There are short-term and long-term risks to any observability solution. And so if you're a customer of one of those solutions, your short-term risk is that you're dealing with a data spike or a misconfiguration that's going to lead to massive overages at the end of the month, right? From a long-term perspective on risk, which in many ways is actually worse, is you have this ever-expanding inertia of these massive data volumes that are growing that are becoming a bigger and bigger problem for your organization. And your observability pipelines allows you to have a good foundation for being able to understand what type of data sets are coming in and what are my high-value data sets, what are my low-value data sets, what should I be filtering out, what type of enrichments or transformations should I be doing on that data. And that ultimately, from a business perspective, and we all need to make the business work, is, it ends up reducing the risk massively for the organizations that we're a part of.
The last thing I want to touch on before we go to our demo here, we've been working with customers a lot on this, Zach. You talk to them on a day in, day out basis. What's the feedback so far? What are customers excited about so far with digital pipelines?
Yeah, I mean, so far the feedback's been great. There's kind of a few, I would say, like consistent pieces of feedback that we've been getting that we're really excited about. One of them goes back to that piece that we were talking about earlier around testing and iteration. So that's been a really big focus for us. Our theme is testability, but basically any step along the way, being able to quickly test without having to go through that full end-to-end deployment process. So just a few clicks. Hey, is this thing working as expected? perfect. I have the confidence that it is. I can move on. So that's been an area that people have been, really excited, good feedback. I think another area that's maybe not as obvious, but is something that we, are put a lot of emphasis in, but we're still chipping away at, is kind of reducing the need to look at documentation while you're using these somewhat complex things. So, historically, if you're working with a configuration file or something else, a lot of times side by side, you have the documentation open, you're trying to figure out, hey, what does this specific thing do? Or if I change this parameter, what effect is that going to have? But our goal with all of this is to basically make it so that there's no requirement to ever look at documentation. Everything should be intuitive enough, down to the tooltip explanations or the placeholder text or the names of the field. So we've really revisited and kind of revamped every piece of the pipeline to try to make it as intuitive as possible and make it, reduce the need for documentation, and which at the end of the day just makes everything faster, more simple. And it also leads to one other area, which I think is important, which is this concept of discoverability. So knowing, hey, what are all the possible things, if you're interacting with a piece of data, and knowing exactly what are all the different functions I could run here, which ones are valid, which ones are invalid, discovering, the actual thing I thought I wanted to do, there's this other feature that might actually be better than that, which before it might be hard to discover that that's even a feature or that's something that might be relevant to you. So, bubbling up everything that's possible and making it easy for users to make the best decisions, set everything up in the most performant way. I think,
and I think
the feedback,
we like to believe that we're either the only tool or the most important tool in any organization. But I think the reality is that you need to have something that's easy and intuitive for people to be able to provide value back to the organization, to Zach's point, without having to go and read 4 hours of documentation. And so, I think if that's one takeaway, it really empowers teams and enables them to do more with a lot less effort. And, I think that's, a big part of this release, because, the ability to potentially filter data on its own might not necessarily be an exciting functionality, but when you package it all up with all the various different functionality and everything else that we can accomplish with this feature set, I'm frankly excited for you guys to see the demo.
So in this, just going to walk through a high-level overview of some of the basics of the visual pipelines experience. So that's what we're looking at here. Just a few fundamental concepts. We have this concept of inputs. So all the various data types we can collect from. In this case, we have our Kubernetes logs input, which is basically collecting from all namespaces, but excluding some others here. In the middle of the graph, we have this concept of what we call processors. So those are basically any manipulation that's being performed with the data. It could be as basic as filters or masking, different routing logic, all the way to logs to metrics, logs to patterns, enrichments, transformations. So a lot of stuff we do in the processor section. And then with the outputs, those are all the various destinations. So in this example, we have our Datadog destination for our metrics and our Splunk for logs. We can also see those down at the bottom from the inputs, the various catalogs of things that we can collect from. From a processor standpoint, catalog of various transformations, enrichments, analytics, filters, optimizations. So we can see those there. Then from an output perspective, everything from archives like S3 buckets and others to streaming destinations, typically your observability platforms that you're using, as well as our core Edge Delta destinations. So for logs, metrics, patterns, and then lastly, trigger destinations for alerting destinations. So with this, I'll just go through kind of a few updates to our configuration and walk through the basics here. Just recapping our setup, we have the raw logs from Kubernetes. There have 2 log to metric processors applied, so looking for errors and exceptions, creating time series metric data sets, and setting that to our Datadog destination. And then we also have our raw logs flowing through this mask password processor, and that's flowing into Splunk. If we wanted to maybe get more details into what these different nodes are doing, we can drill in, see this as mask password in the definition. We could also go through and, test the regex, make sure in this case it's matching our password, but also the processor validate, hey, the incoming data to this node had this password in plain text, but outbound, it's being redacted. So looks like we're all in good shape. So a couple quick tweaks we can make to this. I'll go and let's start by adding, let's say, an S3 archive destination. So I'll come in here, create an output. We'll call this our S3 archive and plug in our bucket name here. And then we also have our keys, secret key, and looks like we're good to go. So we can go ahead and hit deploy. Now, I'll come back to this in a second, but this is one of those concepts of, iterating, validation, testing. This is listed as red, so there's most likely some mistake that happened along the way, but I'll come back to that in a little bit. So now we can come in and maybe just a couple other tweaks to our pipeline that's going into Splunk. I'll go ahead and add, just say we got a request from the team to start dropping our debug logs. So we can just validate. We're going to do this, go ahead and test this, make sure it looks like we're matching what we expect. So that looks good. Now, maybe we want to add one more filter. Maybe there's a really noisy exception or log that's just been hammering our system that we want to quickly go and address. We can come in and kind of same flow as before. We'll say drop noisy exception. And then let's just imagine we have this noisy exception log coming through, and we're going to go and address that. Lastly, I'll go and we added this S3 archive, but it's not hooked up to anything yet. So we want basically all of the raw data that's being masked in this case and feed that over to our S3 bucket. So just a recap of some of the changes. We've gone and added this S3 destination. All the raw data that's being masked is going there. For our Splunk destination, we have the masked data coming through, as well as now a couple filters, and the rest of the raw data is making it in. I'll make one last update here so we can use our, in this case, processor, what we would call it optimization, which is this logs to patterns function. So this is a automated function which automatically clusters and groups similar logs together, creates statistics about those, creates sentiment scores, and will feed typically all that downstream into different destinations. Regardless of potentially raw data that we're dropping, we'll still apply this to 100% of the data, so we still have visibility. So we can take that, I'll hook up our, maybe we want the mass data going in there as well, and then we'll feed this to Splunk. So we can just kind of validate, does everything look good? Now, once we're ready to deploy this, we can review our changes. Quite a few things that we have added and kind of manipulated with the pipeline, but this piece is standing out. Our archive S3 output node looks like it might have an issue. So we can come in, address that. Looks like the region is required here. So in this case, it happens to be US West 2 as well. And we can go and check and make sure that looks good. So, very quick iteration process, feedback loop, testing, validating that everything's set up correctly in the way that we would expect. Now we can go and review these changes one more time and deploy that, and looks like we're good to go. Now let's say this has been running for a while. Maybe we have a request from the team for our metrics that are going into Datadog. Let's say we've started to consume our maybe Istio proxy logs. That's a very high, common, high volume log set where logs to metrics can be very beneficial. So we can go, and one more time, we'll add a new processor. In this case, we can do an optimization log to metric. We'll call this one Istio status codes. And then we'll just do our status, get that, and maybe anything else. This might be one that we want to test as well. So we're checking, perfect. Looks like it's grabbing the status codes. And then similar process as before, we'll hook this up. And in this case, we want this to go over to Datadog. So now we can validate, quickly digesting, hey, this is our section with our logs to metrics. These feed straight into Datadog. Everything else is more related to the log data we're creating and routing and feeding that to Splunk and S3. But yeah, so I think, pretty quick run through of some of the fundamentals there, but recapping some of the basics, being able to quickly digest and understand exactly what our configuration looks like, being able to iterate and build on top of that, being able to test as well as validate that all the changes look like they're good, and having the confidence that we can go and make these updates, deploy them, and everything looks like it'll work as expected. So yeah, excited to walk you through that, and hopefully that was informative and cover some of the basics.
Awesome. That was a great demo. Thanks for walking us through that.
Yeah.
So there's really two ways you can get value out of Edge Delta's visual pipelines today. The first is go to our website and try Edge Delta free. With that, you'll be able to unlock a few of our very powerful processors and start analyzing your data. The second thing is, as part of that experience, if you want to unlock the full feature set, you can work with Zach and the rest of our team to get a personalized onboarding entirely free. They'll walk you through the whole feature set and how to be successful. And it's going to be a really great experience. So go to edgedelta.com. I encourage you to sign up for Edge Delta free and try this new onboarding with Zach.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. We'll be in touch. Thank you.